Now in the original, the words "their secret" really are "their sod." Note: Dunlap, in his introduction to Sod, The Mysteries of Adonis, explains the word sod as arcanum, religious mystery, on the authority of Schindler's Pentaglott. The secret of the Lord is with them that fear him, says Psalm 25, verse 14. This is a mistranslation of the Christians, for it ought to read, Sod io, the mysteries of you, are for those who fear him. See Dunlap, Mysteries of Adonis, 11. El is terrible in the great sod of the Kadeshim, the priests, the holy, the initiated, from the same source. The Kadeshim were very far from holy. See Part 2, the Holy of Holies. End of note. And Sod was the name for the great mysteries of Baal, Adonis and Bacchus, who were all sun gods and had serpents for symbols. The Kabbalists explain the allegory of the fiery serpents by saying that this was the name given to the tribe of Levi, to all the Levites, in short, and that Moses was the chief of the Sodolis. Note: the members of the priest colleges were called Sodolis, says Freund's Latin lexicon, 448. Sodalites were constituted in the Idaean mysteries of the Mighty Mother, writes Cicero in De Senectute. See Mysteries of Adonis. End of note. It is to the mysteries that the original meaning of the dragon slayers has to be traced, and the question is fully treated of hereafter. Meanwhile it follows that if Moses was the chief of the mysteries, he was the hierophant thereof, and further, if at the same time we find the prophets thundering against the abominations of the people of Israel, that there were two schools. Fiery serpents was, then, simply the epithet given to the Levites of the priestly caste, after they had departed from the good law, the traditional teachings of Moses, and to all those who followed black magic. Isaiah, when referring to the rebellious children who will have to carry their riches into the land whence come the viper and the fiery flying serpent, chapter 30, verse 6, or Chaldea and Egypt, whose initiates had already greatly degenerated in his day, 700 before Christ, meant the sorcerers of those lands. Note: the priests of Baal who jumped over the fires. But this was a Hebrew term and a local one. Seraph, fiery or flaming venom. End of note. But these must be carefully distinguished from the fiery dragons of wisdom and the sons of the fire mist. In the great book of the mysteries, we are told that 7 lords created 7 men. 3 lords, Diancochans or Pitris, were holy and good, 4 less heavenly and full of passion. The Chayas, phantoms, of the fathers were as they. This accounts for the differences in human nature, which is divided into 7 gradations of good and evil. There were 7 tabernacles ready to be inhabited by monads under 7 different karmic conditions. The commentaries explain on this basis the easy spread of evil as soon as the human forms had become real men. Some ancient philosophers ignored the 7 in their genetical accounts and gave only 4. Thus the Mexican local Genesis had 4 good men, described as the 4 real ancestors of the human race, who were neither begotten by the gods nor born of woman, but whose creation was a wonder wrought by the creative powers, and who were made only after 3 attempts at manufacturing men had failed. The Egyptians had in their theology only 4 sons of God, whereas in Pimander 7 are given, thus avoiding any mention of the evil nature of man. Though when Seth from a god sank into Set-Typhon, he began to be called the 7th son, whence probably arose the belief that the 7th son of the 7th son is always a natural-born magician, though at first only a sorcerer was meant. Apap, the serpent symbolizing evil, is slain by Akar, Set's serpent. Therefore Set-Typhon could not be that evil. Note: see Book of the Dead, 39. End of note. In the Book of the Dead it is commanded, verse 13, that chapter 163 should be read in the presence of the serpent on two legs, which means a high initiate, a hierophant, for the discus and ram's horns that adorn his serpent's head in the hieroglyphics of the title of the said chapter denote this. Note: the same ram's horns are found on the heads of Moses, which were on some old medals seen by the writer in Palestine, one of which is in her possession. The horns, made to form part of the shining aureole of the statue of Moses in Rome, Michelangelo, are vertical instead of being bent down to the ears, but the emblem is the same, hence the brazen serpent. End of note. But as to the Nagals and Nargals, whence came the similarity of names between the Indian Nagas and the American Nagals? The Nargal was the Chaldean and Assyrian chief of the Magi, Rabmag, and the Nagal was the chief sorcerer of the Mexican Indians. Both derive their names from Nergal-Zerzer, the Assyrian god, and the Hindu Nagas. Both have the same faculties and the power to have an attendant daemon, with whom they identify themselves completely. The Chaldean and Assyrian Nargal kept his daemon, in the shape of some animal considered sacred, inside the temple. The Indian Nagal keeps his wherever he can, in the neighboring lake or wood, or in the house in the shape of some household animal. Note: Brasseur de Bourbourg, Mexique, pages 135 and 574. End of note. Such similarity cannot be attributed to coincidence. A new world is discovered, and we find that for our forefathers of the fourth race it was already an old one. That Arjuna, Krishna's companion and Chela, is said to have descended into Patala, the antipodes, and therein married Ulupi, a Naga, or Nagini rather, the daughter of the king of the Nagas, Kauraviya. Note: Ulupi has an entirely Atlantean ring about it. Like Atlantis, it is neither a Greek nor a Sanskrit name, but reminds one of Mexican names. And note on Kauraviya: see Mahabharata, Adiparva, Slokas 7788 and 7789. The Bhagavata Purana 9:20, verse 31, as explained by Sridhara, the commentator, makes Ulupi the daughter of the king of Manipura, but the late Pundit Dayanand Saraswati, certainly the greatest Sanskrit and Puranic authority in India on such questions, personally corroborated that Ulupi was daughter of the king of the Nagas at Patala, or America, 5,000 years ago, and that the Nagas were initiates. End of notes. And now it may be hoped the full meaning of the serpent emblem is proven. It is neither that of evil, nor, least of all, that of the devil, but is indeed the eternal Son Abrasax, Kiemik Elam Abrasach, the central spiritual sun of all the Kabbalists, represented in some diagrams by the circle of Tiferet. And here again we may quote from our early volumes and enter into further explanations. From this region of unfathomable depth, Bituth, Aditi, Shekinah, the veil of the unknown, issues forth a circle formed of spirals. This is Tipereth, which, in the language of symbolism, means a grand cycle composed of smaller ones. Coiled within, so as to follow the spirals, lies the serpent, emblem of wisdom and eternity, the dual androgyne, the cycle representing Enoia, or the divine mind, a power which does not create, but which must assimilate, and the serpent, the Agathodaemon, the Ophis, the shadow of the light, non-eternal, yet the greatest divine light on our plane. Both were the logoi of the Ophites, or the unity as logos manifesting itself as a double principle of good and evil. Were it light alone, inactive and absolute, the human mind could not appreciate nor even realize it. Shadow is that which enables light to manifest itself and gives it objective reality. Therefore shadow is not evil, but is the necessary and indispensable corollary which completes light or good. It is its creator on earth. According to the views of the Gnostics, these two principles are immutable light and shadow, good and evil being virtually one and having existed through all eternity, as they will ever continue to exist so long as there are manifested worlds. This symbol accounts for the adoration by this sect of the serpent as the savior, coiled either around the sacramental loaf or tau, the phallic emblem. As a unity, Enoia and Ophis are the logos. When separated, one is the tree of life, spiritual, the other the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Therefore we find Ophis urging the first human couple, the material production of Ildabaut, but which owed its spiritual principle to Sophia Akamot, to eat of the forbidden fruit, although Ophis represents divine wisdom. The serpent, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life are all symbols transplanted from the soil of India. The Arasamaram, the banyan tree, so sacred with the Hindus, since Vishnu during one of his incarnations reposed under its mighty shade and there taught human philosophy and sciences, is called the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. Under the protecting foliage of this king of the forests, the gurus teach their pupils their first lessons on immortality and initiate them into the mysteries of life and death. The Java Alaim of the sacerdotal college are said, in the Chaldean tradition, to have taught the sons of men to become like one of them. To the present day, Photku, who lives in his Formeyu, or temple of Buddha, on the top of the Qinlongthang, the great mountain, produces his greatest religious miracles under a tree called in Chinese Zhongmin Chu, or the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. For ignorance is death, and knowledge alone gives immortality. Notes: Photku, literally in Chinese meaning Buddha's Lord, or the teacher of the doctrines of Buddha Fo, and the mountain of Qinlongthang. This mountain is situated southwest of China, almost between China and Tibet. End of notes. This marvelous display takes place every 3 years, when an immense concourse of Chinese Buddhists assemble in pilgrimage at the holy place. Now it may become comprehensible why the earliest initiates and adepts, or the wise men, for whom it is claimed that they were initiated into the mysteries of nature by the universal mind, represented by the highest angels, were named the serpents of wisdom and dragons, as also how the first physiologically complete couples, after being initiated into the mystery of human creation through Ophis, the manifested Logos, and the androgyne by eating of the fruit of knowledge, gradually began to be accused by the material spirit of posterity of having committed sin, of having disobeyed the Lord God, and of having been tempted by the serpent. So little have the first Christians, who despoiled the Jews of their Bible, understood the first 4 chapters of Genesis in their esoteric meaning, that they never perceived that not only was no sin intended in this disobedience, but that actually the serpent was the Lord God himself, who, as the Ophis, the Logos, or the bearer of divine creative wisdom, taught mankind to become creators in their turn. Note: let the reader be reminded that in the Zohar, and also in all the Kabbalistic works, it is maintained that Metatron, united to Shekinah, or Shekinah as the veil, grace, of Ein Sof, representing the Logos, is that very tree of knowledge, while Shamael, the dark aspect of the Logos, occupies only the rind of that tree, and has the knowledge of evil alone. As Lacoeur, who saw in the scenes of the fall in chapter 3 of Genesis 2 Egyptian initiations, says, the tree of the divination, or of the knowledge of good and evil, is the science of Xiphon, the genius of doubt. Zi, to teach, and Phon, doubt. Xiphon is one of the Alaim. We shall see him presently under the name of Nak, the tempter. Les Elohim, volume 2, page 218. He is now known to the symbologists under the name Jehovah. End of note. Reader's note: also compare Nak, the tempter, with Nekin in Scandinavian tradition. And reader's note: they never realized that the cross was an evolution from the tree and the serpent, and thus became the salvation of mankind. By this it would become the very first fundamental symbol of the creative cause, applying to geometry, to numbers, to astronomy, to measure, and to animal reproduction. According to the Kabbalah, the curse on man came with the formation of woman. Note, this is the view taken and adopted by all the Church Fathers, but it is not the real esoteric teaching. The curse did not begin with the formation of either man or woman, for that separation was a natural consequence of evolution, but for breaking the law. See Supra. End of note. The circle was separated from its diameter line. From the possession of the double principle in one, that is the androgyne condition, the separation of the dual principle was made, presenting two opposites whose destiny it was forever after to seek reunion into the original one condition. The curse was this, meaning that nature, impelling the search, evaded the desired result by the production of a new being, distinct from that reunion or oneness desired, by which the natural longing to recover a lost state was and is forever being cheated. It is by this tantalizing process of a continued curse that nature lives. Read Cross and Circle on Part 2. Note, by which human nature lives, not even the animal, but the misguided, sensual, and vicious nature which men, not nature, created. End of note. The allegory of Adam being driven away from the tree of life means esoterically that the newly separated race abused and dragged the mystery of life down into the region of animalism and bestiality. For as the Zohar shows, that Matroneta, Shekinah, the wife of Metatron symbolically, is the way to the great tree of life, the mighty tree, and Shekinah is divine grace. As explained, this tree reaches the heavenly veil and is hidden between three mountains, the upper triad of principles in man. From these three mountains, the tree ascends above the adept's knowledge, aspires heavenward, and then redescends below into the adept's ego on earth. This tree is revealed in the daytime and is hidden during the night, that is, revealed to an enlightened mind and hidden to ignorance, which is night. See Zohar 1, 172a and b. The tree of the knowledge of the good and the evil grows from the roots of the tree of life. Commentary. But then also, in the Kabbalah it is plainly to be found that the tree of life was the ansated cross and its sexual aspect, and that the tree of knowledge was the separation and the coming together again to fulfill the fatal condition. To display this in numbers, the value of the letters composing of the word Utz, tree, are 7 and 9, the 7 being the holy feminine number and the 9 the number of the phallic or male energy. This ansated cross is the symbol of the Egyptian female male, Isis Osiris, the germinal principle in all forms, based on the primal manifestation applicable in all directions and in all senses. Note. See the source of measures. End of note. This is the Kabbalistic view of the Western occultists, and it differs from the more philosophical Eastern or Aryan views upon this subject. Note. Vid infra the septenary in Part 2. End of note. The separation of the sexes was in the program of nature and of natural evolution, and the creative faculty in male and female was a gift of divine wisdom. In the truth of such traditions, the whole of antiquity, from the patrician philosopher to the humblest, spiritually inclined plebeian, has believed. And as we proceed, we may successfully show that the relative truth of such legends, if not their absolute exactness, vouched for by such giants of intellect as were Solon, Pythagoras, Plato, and others, begins to dawn upon more than one modern scientist. He is perplexed. He stands startled and confused before proofs that are being daily accumulated before him. He feels that there is no way of solving the many historical problems that stare him in the face unless he begins by accepting ancient traditions. Therefore, in saying that we believe absolutely in ancient records and universal legends, we need hardly plead guilty before the impartial observer, for other and far more learned writers among those who belong to the modern scientific school evidently believe in much that the occultists do, for example, in, quote, dragons, unquote, not only symbolically, but also in their actual existence at one time. Now a lengthy quote. It would have indeed been a bold step for anyone, some 30 years ago, to have thought of treating the public to a collection of stories ordinarily reputed fabulous, and of claiming for them the consideration due to genuine realities, or to have advocated tales believed to be time-honored fictions as actual facts, and those of the nursery as being in many instances legends more or less distorted, descriptive of real beings or events. Nowadays it is a less hazardous proceeding, unquote, and thus opens the introduction to a recent, 1886, and most interesting work by Mr. Charles Gould, called Mythical Monsters. He boldly states his belief in most of these monsters. He submits that many of the so-called mythical animals, which throughout long ages and in all nations have been the fertile subjects of fiction and fable, come legitimately within the scope of plain matter of fact natural history, and that they may be considered not as the outcome of exuberant fancy, but as creatures which really once existed, and of which, unfortunately, only imperfect and inaccurate descriptions have filtered down to us, probably very much refracted through the mists of time. Traditions of creatures once coexisting with man, some of which are so weird and terrible as to appear at first sight to be impossible. For me, the major part of those creatures are not chimeras, but objects of rational study. The dragon, in place of being a creature evolved out of the imagination of an Aryan man by the contemplation of lightning flashing through the caverns which he tenanted, as is held by some mythologists, is an animal which once lived and dragged its ponderous coils and perhaps flew. To me, the specific existence of the unicorn seems not incredible, and in fact more probable than that theory which assigns its origin to a lunar myth. Note, The Unicorn, a Mythological Investigation by Robert Brown, FSA. End of note. For my part, I doubt the general derivation of myths from the contemplation of the visible workings of external nature. It seems to me easy to suppose that the palsy of time has enfeebled the utterance of these oft-told tales until their original appearance is almost unrecognizable, than that uncultured savages should possess powers of imagination and poetical invention far beyond those enjoyed by the most instructed nations of the present day. Less hard to believe that these wonderful stories of gods and demigods, of giants and dwarfs, of dragons and monsters of all descriptions are transformations than to believe them to be inventions. Unquote. Note, pages 3 and 4, Introduction to Mythical Monsters. End of note. It is shown by the same geologist that man, successively traced to periods variously estimated from 30,000 to 1 million years, coexisted with animals which have long since become extinct, on page 20. These animals, weird and terrible, were, to give a few instances, one of the genus Cydestis, whose huge bones and vertebrae show them to have attained a length of nearly 200 feet. The remains of such monsters, no less than 10 in number, were seen by Professor March in the Mouvier's Terre of Colorado, strewn upon the plains. 2. The Titanosaurus montanus, reaching 50 or 60 feet in length. 3. The dinosaurians in the Jurassic beds of the Rocky Mountains, of still more gigantic proportions. 4. The Atlantosaurus immanis, a femur, of which alone is over 6 feet in length, and which would be thus over 100 feet in length. But even yet the line has not been reached, and we hear the discoverer remains of such titanic proportions as to possess a thigh bone over 12 feet in length, page 37. Then we read of the monstrous Shivaterium in the Himalayas, the four-horned stag, as large as an elephant and exceeding the latter in height, of the gigantic Megatherium, of colossal flying lizards, pterodactyly, with crocodile jaws on a duck's head, etc., etc. All these were coexistent with man, most probably attacked man as man attacked them. And we are asked to believe that the said man was no larger than he is now. Is it possible to conceive that surrounded in nature with such monstrous creatures, man, unless himself a colossal giant, could have survived, while all his foes have perished? Is it with his stone hatchet that he had the best of a Shivatherium or a gigantic flying saurian? Let us always bear in mind that at least one great man of science, Descartes, sees no good scientific reason why man should not have been, quote, contemporaneous with the earliest mammalia and go back as far as the secondary period, unquote. Note, see the human species, page 52, end of note. It appears, writes the very conservative Professor Jukes, that the flying dragons of romance had something like a real existence in the former ages of the world. Note, see Manual of Geology, page 301, end of note. Does the written history of man, the author goes on to ask, comprising of a few thousand years, embrace the whole course of his intelligent existence? Or have we, in the long mythical eras extending over hundreds of thousands of years, and recorded in the chronologies of Chaldea and China, shadowy mementos of a prehistoric man, handed down by tradition and perhaps transported by a few survivors to existing lands from others which, like the fabled Atlantis of Plato, may have been submerged, or the scene of some great catastrophe which destroyed them with all their civilization, unquote, on page 17. The few remaining giant animals, such as elephants, themselves smaller than their ancestors the mastodons and hippopotami, are the only surviving relics and tend to disappear more entirely with every day. Even they had already had a few pioneers of their future genus, and have decreased in size in the same proportion as men did. For the remains of a pygmy elephant were found by E. Falconeri in the cave deposits of Malta, and the same author asserts that they were associated with the remains of a pygmy hippopotami, the former being only 2 feet 6 inches high, or the still existing hippopotamus, Charopsis liberinensis, which M. Milne Edwards figures as little more than 2 feet in height. Note, Recherche sur les mammifères, plate 1, end of note. Skeptics may smile and denounce our work as full of nonsense or fairy tales, but by so doing they only justify the wisdom of the Chinese philosopher Chuang, who said that the things that men do know can in no way be compared, numerically speaking, to the things that are unknown, and thus they laugh only at their own ignorance. Note, Preface to Wonders by Land and Sea by Shun Hai King, end of note. The Sons of God and the Sacred Island. The legend given in Isis in relation to a portion of the globe which science now concedes to have been the cradle of humanity, though it is but one of the 7 cradles in truth, ran condensed, and now explained as follows. Tradition says, and the records of the great book, the Book of Jan, explain that long before the days of Adam and his inquisitive wife Heva, where now are found but salt lakes and desolate barren deserts, there was a vast inland sea, which extended over Middle Asia, north of the proud Himalayan range and its western prolongation. An island which, for its unparalleled beauty, had no rival in the world, was inhabited by the last remnant of the race which preceded ours. The last remnant meant the sons of Will and Yoga, who, with a few tribes, survived the great cataclysm. For it is the 3rd race which inhabited the great Lemurian continent that preceded the veritable and complete human races, the 4th and the 5th. Therefore it was said in Isis that this race could live with equal ease in water, air, or fire, for it had an unlimited control over the elements. These were the sons of God, not those who saw the daughters of men, but the real Elohim, though in the Oriental Kabbalah they have another name. It was they who imparted nature's most weird secrets to men and revealed to them the ineffable and now lost word. The island, according to belief, exists to the present hour, now as an oasis surrounded by the dreadful wilderness of the great desert, the Gobi, whose sands no foot hath crossed in the memory of man. This word, which is no word, has travelled once around the globe, and still lingers as a far-off dying echo in the hearts of some privileged men. The hierophants of all the sacerdotal colleges were aware of the existence of this island, but the quote word unquote was known only to the Java Alim, Mahakochan in another tongue, or chief lord of every college, and was passed to his successor only at the moment of death. There were many such colleges, and the old classic authors speak of them. There was no communication with the fair island by sea, but subterranean passages known only to the chiefs communicated with it in all directions. Note: there are archaeologists who, like Mr. James Ferguson, deny the great antiquity of even one single monument in India. In his work, Illustrations of the Rock-Cut Temples of India, the author ventures to express the very extraordinary opinion that Egypt had ceased to be a nation before the earliest of the cave temples of India was excavated. In short, he does not admit the existence of any cave anterior to the reign of Ashoka, and seems anxious to prove that most of these rock-cut temples were executed during a period extending from the time of that pious Buddhist king until the destruction of the Andhra dynasty of Magadha in the beginning of the 5th century. We believe such a claim perfectly arbitrary. Further discoveries will show that it is erroneous and unwarranted. End of note. Tradition asserts, and archaeology accepts, the truth of the legend that there is more than one city now flourishing in India, which is built on several other cities, making thus a subterranean city of 6 or 7 stories high. Delhi is one of them, Allahabad another. Examples of this being found even in Europe, for example in Florence, which is built on several defunct Etruscan and other cities. Why then could not Ellora, Elephanta, Karli, and Ajunta have been built on subterranean labyrinths and passages as claimed? Of course we do not allude to the caves which are known to every European, whether de visu or through hearsay, notwithstanding their enormous antiquity, though that is so disputed by modern archaeology. But it is a fact known to the initiated Brahmins of India, and especially to yogis, that there is not a cave temple in the country, but has its subterranean passages running in every direction, and that those underground caves and endless corridors have in their turn their caves and corridors. Who can tell that the lost Atlantis, which is also mentioned in the secret book, but then under another name pronounced in the sacred language, did not exist yet in those days? We went on to ask. It did exist, most assuredly, as it was fast approaching its greatest days of glory and civilization when the last of the Lemurian continents went down. The great lost continent might have perhaps been situated south of Asia, extending from India to Tasmania. Note: America, when discovered, was called Atlanta by some native tribes. End of note. If the hypothesis, now so much doubted and positively denied by some learned authors who regard it as a joke of Plato's, is ever verified, then perhaps will the scientists believe that the description of the God-inhabited continent was not altogether a fable. Note: since then, Donnelly's Atlantis has appeared, and soon its actual existence will have become a scientific fact. End of note. And they may then perceive that Plato's guarded hints, and his attributing the narrative to Solon and the Egyptian priests, were but a prudent way of imparting the fact to the world, and by cleverly combining truth and fiction, so disconnecting himself from a story which the obligations imposed at initiation forbade him to divulge. To continue the tradition, we have to add that the class of hierophants was divided into 2 distinct categories. Note: it is divided to this day, Anthosophists and occultists who have learned something of the occult but undeniable power of Dugpaship at their own expense know this but too well. End of note. Those who were instructed by the sons of God of the island and who were initiated in the divine doctrine of pure revelation, and others who inhabited the lost Atlantis, if such must be its name, and who, being of another race, born sexually but of divine parents, were born with a sight which embraced all living things and was independent of both distance and material obstacle. In short, they were the fourth race of men mentioned in the Popol Vuh, whose sight was unlimited, and who knew all things at once. In other words, they were the Lemuro-Atlanteans, the first who had a dynasty of spirit kings, not of manes or ghosts, as some believe, see pneumatology, but of actual living devas, or demigods or angels, again, who had assumed bodies to rule over them, and who in their turn instructed them in arts and sciences. Only, as they were rupa or material spirits, these dhyanis were not always good. Their king Tevetata was one of the latter, and it is under the evil influence of this king-demon that the Atlantis race became a nation of wicked magicians. Geographically, this description clashes slightly with the facts in the secret records, but it shows the existence of such traditions, and this is all one cares for. For, as there is no smoke without fire, so a tradition must be based on some approximate truth. In its proper place we will show modern science fully corroborating the above and the traditions of the secret doctrine with regard to the two lost continents. The Easter Island relics are, for instance, the most astounding and eloquent memorials of the primeval giants. They are as grand as they are mysterious, and one has but to examine the heads of the colossal statues that have remained unbroken on that island to recognize in them at a glance the features of the type and character attributed to the fourth race giants. They seem of one cast, though different in features, that of a distinctly sensual type, such as the Atlanteans and, quote, Atlanteans, unquote, are represented to have in the esoteric Hindu books. Compare these with the faces of some other colossal statues in Central Asia, those near Bamiyan, for instance, the portrait statues, tradition tells us, of Buddhas belonging to previous manvantaras. Of those Buddhas and heroes who are mentioned in the Buddhist and Hindu works as men of fabulous size, the good and holy brothers, or their wicked co-uterine brothers generally, as Ravana, the giant king of Lanka, was the brother of Kumbhakarna, all descendants of the gods through the rishis, and thus, like Titan and his enormous brood, all heaven's firstborn. These, quote, Buddhas, unquote, though often spoilt by the symbolical representation of the great pendant ears, show a suggestive difference perceived at a glance between the expression of their faces and that of the Easter Isle statues. They may be of one race, but the former are, quote, sons of gods, unquote, the latter the brood of mighty sorcerers. All these are reincarnations, however, and apart from unavoidable exaggerations in popular fancy and tradition, they are historical characters. Note on Buddhist and Hindu works as men of fabulous size. An approach to the statues at Bamiyan, also a Buddha 200 feet high, is found near a Jain settlement in southern India, and appears to be the only one that remains at present. And note on historical characters. Even Wilson admits that Rama and Ravana are personages founded on historical facts. Quote, the traditions of southern India uniformly ascribing its civilization and the settlement of civilized Hindus, the fifth race, to the conquest of Lanka by Rama, unquote. Vishnu Purana 3, page 318. The victory of the sons of God over the Atlantean sorcerers, says the true tradition. End of notes. When did they live? How long ago lived the two races, the third and fourth, and how long after did the various tribes of the fifth begin their strife, the wars between good and evil? We are assured by the Orientalists that chronology is both hopelessly mixed and absurdly exaggerated in the Puranas and other Hindu scriptures. We feel quite prepared to agree with the accusation, yet If Aryan writers did allow their chronological pendulum to swing too far one way occasionally beyond the legitimate limit of fact, nevertheless, when the distance of that deviation is compared with the distance of the Orientalists' deviation in the opposite direction, moderation will be found on the Brahminical side. It is the Pundit who will, in the long run, be found more truthful and nearer to fact than the Sanskritist. Surely, it is not because the curtailing of the latter, even when proven to have been resorted to in order to fit a personal hobby, is regarded by Western public opinion as a cautious acceptance of facts, or as the Pundit is brutally treated in print as a liar, that everyone has to see this in the same light. An impartial observer may judge it otherwise. He may either proclaim both unscrupulous historians, or justify both, each on his respective ground, and say, Hindu Aryans wrote for their initiates, who read truth between the lines, not for the masses. If they did mix up the events and confuse ages intentionally, it was not in view of deceiving anyone, but to preserve their knowledge from the prying eye of the foreigner. Otherwise, to him who can count the generations from the Manus and the series of incarnations specified in the cases of some heroes, the meaning and chronological order are very clear in the Puranas. Note: thus we are shown one hero to give an instance, firstborn as the unrighteous but valiant monarch, Purusha of the Daityas, Hiranyakasipu, slain by the avatar Narasina, man-lion. Then he was born as Ravana, the giant king of Lanka, and killed by Rama, after which he is reborn as Sisupala, the son of Raya Rishi, King Rishi, Dhamagosha, when he is again killed by Krishna, the last incarnation of Vishnu. This parallel evolution of Vishnu spirit with the Daitya, as men, may seem meaningless, yet it gives us the key not only to the respective dates of Rama and Krishna, but even to a certain psychological mystery. End of note. As for the Western Orientalist, he must be excused on account of his undeniable ignorance of the methods used by archaic esotericism. But such existing prejudices will have to give way and disappear very soon before the light of new discoveries. Already Dr. Weber's and Mr. Max Müller's favorite theories, namely that writing was not known in India even in the days of Panini, within brackets, exclamation mark, that the Hindus had all their arts and sciences, even to the zodiac and their architecture, says Ferguson, from the Macedonian Greeks, these and other such cock-and-bull hypotheses are threatened with ruin. It is the ghost of old Chaldea that comes to the rescue of truth. In his third Hibbert lecture, 1887, Professor Sayce of Oxford, speaking of newly discovered Assyrian and Babylonian cylinders, referred at length to Ea, the god of wisdom, now identified with Ioannis of Berossus, the half-man, half-fish, who taught the Babylonians culture and the art of writing. This Ioannis, to whom, thanks only to the biblical deluge, an antiquity of hardly 1,500 before Christ had been hitherto allowed, is now spoken of in these terms. Quote, his city was Eridu, which stood 6,000 years ago on the shores of the Persian Gulf. The name means the good city, a particularly holy spot, since it was the center from which the earliest Chaldean civilization made its way to the north. As the culture god was represented as coming from the sea, it was possible that the culture which Eridu was of foreign importation. We know now that there was intercourse at a very early period between Chaldea and the Sinaitic Peninsula, as well as with India. The statues discovered by the French at Tello, dating from at latest before Christ 4000, were made of the extremely hard stone known as diorite, and the inscriptions on them stated the diorite to have been brought from Mazan, that is, the Sinaitic Peninsula, which was then ruled by the pharaohs. The statues are known to resemble in a general style the diorite statue Khephren, the builder of the second pyramid, while, according to Mr. Petrie, the unit of measurement marked on the plan of the city, which one of the Tello figures holds on his lap, is the same as that employed by the pyramid builders. teak wood has been found at Mugher, or Ur of the Chaldees, although that wood is an Indian special product. Add to this that an ancient Babylonian list of clothing mentions Sindhu, or muslins, explained as vegetable cloth, unquote. Muslin, best known now as Adaka muslin, known in Chaldea as Hindu, Sindhu, and teak wood used 4,000 years before Christ, and yet the Hindus, to whom Chaldea owes its civilization, as well proven by Colonel Fons Kennedy, were ignorant of the art of writing before the Greeks taught them their alphabet, if we have to believe Orientalists. Next chapter is Stanza 10, the history of the fourth race.